Hello, everyone. I'm Jennifer Sklarew, an assistant professor in George Mason University's Department of Environmental Science and Policy. And I research and teach on the food, energy, water nexus, focusing on the institutional aspects of the connections between these three systems as they relate to ecology and economics. My work on the food, energy, water nexus is based on over 25 years of experience in energy and environmental policymaking and analysis, including positions in the US Department of Commerce's International Trade Administration, an energy policy consulting firm, and a Japanese government subsidiary focused on energy. I'm currently working on projects examining Nexus challenges in Virginia, as well as in overseas communities. And today I'd like to set agriculture and food system sustainability and resilience in the context of the food, energy, water nexus. So what I'd like to discuss today are food, energy, water synergies and trade-offs and implications for community resilience and justice. And the first thing I'd like to do is talk about agriculture and food security in that context of the food, energy, water nexus, and some connections between agriculture and food and water, and agriculture and food and energy. And then I'll talk a little bit about some US government programs addressing agriculture and food security in the context of the food, energy, water nexus. Then I will touch on some future resilience suggestions at national and local levels. And that will lead us to a discussion of food apartheid and food justice in the food, energy, water nexus. And finally, some key considerations for policies on sustainable, resilient agriculture and food security. So food, energy, and water systems face individual challenges to their sustainability and resilience. And I'm guessing that many of you or all of you in the audience are aware of some or many or maybe even all of those challenges. They can be ecological, economic, institutional, technological, or combinations of any of those. And links between these three systems of food, energy, and water can generate additional challenges. However, integrative solutions that leverage these systems' interdependencies are emerging. If we look at some agriculture water connections globally, irrigated agriculture accounts for 20% of total cultivated land worldwide and contributes 40% of total food produced worldwide. Agriculture is the largest consumer of available fresh water, with 70% of withdrawals from water courses and groundwater for agricultural usage, which is 3 times greater than 50 years ago. And by 2050, we'll see about a 19% rise in global water demand for agriculture due to irrigation needs. Crop irrigation accounts for 29% of all US water withdrawals. And on livestock farms, large supply of water is consumed by animals as drinking water and for other purposes. If we look at agriculture and energy connections, particularly in the US, direct energy use on US farms includes energy for growing, harvesting, and transportation, and it consumed 1,200 trillion BTU, that's British thermal units, in 2018. Indirect energy consumption for applications such as fertilizers, herbicides, and pesticides can also require substantial amounts of energy. And for instance, a ton of ammonia, the primary input for nitrogen fertilizers, requires 33 million BTU of natural gas to produce. Total on-farm energy use has gotten more efficient. It accounts for 1.8% of total US energy demand, down from a peak of 3.1% in 1979. And the US agriculture industry uses 3,000 BTU per dollar of production, which is down from 12,000 in the late 1970s. If we look at US food and energy connections by sector within the food system, these are 2018 figures, but we can see that handling accounts for almost 50% of that energy use. And handling is everything after the processing takes place. So retail, restaurants, packaging, and consumption. So refrigeration, all of that is accounted for in handling. So we can see where we might need to target reductions in energy use or efficiencies in energy use in the handling part of the food system. If we look at some government programs in the US that are addressing agriculture and food security in the context of the food, energy, water nexus, these are just a few examples from a few agencies. There are many more. So the US Department of Agriculture, USDA, had several programs, and I wanted to highlight two of them. One is a study that was done from 2000 to 2014 of the effects of energy price shocks on household food security in low-income households. And the study found that unexpected increases in energy price increases, so a rise in those increases, increase the likelihood that low-income households will experience food insecurity and food distress. There's a program that has been ongoing, but not necessarily well known across all farming communities, all agricultural communities, and it's called the Rural Energy for America program, REAP, and it provides financial assistance to agricultural producers and rural small businesses to purchase, install, and construct renewable energy systems, improve energy efficiency in non-residential buildings and facilities, and use renewable technologies that decrease energy consumption. And we'll talk a little bit more about access to these programs when we talk about food justice and food apartheid at the, towards the end of the presentation. So these two areas of food security and agriculture are both touched on in these USDA programs. The Department of Energy's ARPA-E, so their innovation arm, has many programs, and I only wanted to highlight two of them, but there are many others. Petro is plants engineered to replace oil, which aims to develop non-food crops that directly produce transportation fuel. And Roots is the Rhizosphere Observations Optimizing Terrestrial Sequestration program project, and that involves advanced technologies and crop cultivars that enable a 50% increase in soil carbon accumulation. So the plants better store carbon in their roots. It's improved carbon storage, while reducing nitrous oxide emissions by 50% and increasing water productivity by 25%. So touching on all parts of the nexus, food, energy, and water. And finally, NASA and NOAA both use, in conjunction, it's a cooperative program through the DEVELOP program. They use satellite imagery in food, energy, water nexus solutions. And you will hear a presentation from one of the NASA DEVELOP team members on a project that was very pertinent to food, energy, water nexus and agriculture in particular. So if we think about future resilience at the national and local levels for food security and agriculture, we need programs that link agriculture and food security across the food, energy, water nexus. If you noticed, the previous programs were all terrific programs and very effective, but many of them approach one part of the food chain and not necessarily the food system and not necessarily the whole system. And that is beneficial at times, but we do need some programs that can link across the entire food system and across the entire food, energy, water nexus. We also need programs that address food, energy, water trade-offs across the food supply chain. So again, reaching all parts of the supply chain. And we need programs that support both resource availability and accessibility. So just because agricultural resources and food resources are available does not necessarily mean they are accessible to all members of the population. So not all resources are available to all farmers, and not all resources are, in terms of food, are available to all consumers. We also need programs that promote resilience thinking across the food, energy, water nexus and ways to make that whole entire food system more sustainable. And we need to account for local variations and recognize that each place is unique and will face unique challenges that require unique solutions designed specifically for that place with input from that community. So all of these involve demographics and geography, because we're talking about communities. This leads us to a conversation about demographics and geography regarding agriculture and food security in the food, energy, water nexus. Agriculture and food security challenges affect populations differently, even within the same place. If they're within different places, for instance, rural versus urban populations, they will have different challenges that have different effects on those populations. Wealthy and impoverished communities will have different effects, will face different effects as a result of challenges, even if they live within the same geographical area. Which leads us to a discussion of food, energy, water justice. Communities can view and use food, energy, water resources differently. So even if they have access to the same resources and those resources are available, they may use them in different ways depending on the community structure, depending on the economics of that population, depending on sometimes even religion or culture of that population. And food, energy, water insecurity and its effects differ across communities. So even if you have the exact same challenge, it may affect two different communities very differently. For instance, if we think about the way water shortages affect the farming community in California compared to the way water shortages affect farming communities in Venezuela. This brings us to a conversation about food justice, but also food apartheid in the food, energy, water nexus. So if we talk about food justice, that's a term that many may have heard. Food apartheid is a newer term, and it was coined by an activist who recognized that the roles of race, economics, faith, and geography in agricultural challenges and food insecurity have gone largely unrecognized by many. So justice is broader than just the concept of getting food to people and getting resources to farmers. There are racial barriers, economic barriers, sometimes faith barriers, and geographical barriers that need to be taken into account. In terms of food supply barriers, there are farmers of certain groups that have trouble accessing financing compared to other groups. In terms of food demand barriers, on the demand side, there are availability issues, accessibility issues, affordability issues, and acceptability issues regarding access to nutritious food. So the food needs to be available, nutritious food needs to be available, it needs to be accessible to all communities, it needs to be affordable for all of those communities, and it needs to be culturally acceptable. There are situations in which certain communities have become accustomed to growing or eating certain foods that may not be considered nutritious, and shifting that culture away from those foods can be very challenging, but it is part of the food justice and food apartheid concept and an issue that needs to be addressed. So if we look at the role of energy and water in food apartheid and food justice, we have to think about the clean water access role in food supply and food access. So these communities that are struggling with food supply, or farmers that are facing challenges regarding access to resources for their farming, often find that clean water access is a part of that challenge. So that includes issues such as droughts and flooding, irrigation, well water, pollution in well water or running water that is extracted from streams and rivers and lakes, and drinking water, water that is used to wash food, etc. In addition to that, the stability of electricity plays a role in the food supply chain. So the farmers, the farming community needs access to stable electricity in order to produce their products and in order to transport those products. And then when we get to the processing stage, processing those products. And then on the consumption side, electricity is needed to preserve those foods, cook the foods. And so stable electricity actually plays a major role in food justice. And finally, the electricity price plays a role in food access. So the prices of electricity for the agricultural community and also for the communities consuming the agricultural products. I mentioned the USDA study on rising electricity prices and how those affected the ability of households to access food and access nutritious food. So those are all considerations that need to be taken into account. And I think it's very important for us to place this idea of sustainable food systems in this context of food, energy, water systems. Okay, so finally, some key considerations for sustainable, resilient agricultural and food security policies. First of all, Nexus thinking, which I've emphasized already. So integrated policies for food and agriculture, energy, water, and other sectors that are connected, such as transportation and IT, because broadband access, internet access is a big issue for rural communities and farming communities. In addition to that, Nexus thinking also involves consideration of implications across sectors. So how use of water may affect food and energy, how use of energy affects food and water. And finally, our Nexus thinking could include creation of a new innovation arm that focuses on agriculture. And this has been proposed by some members of Congress. It will be proposed in a report coming out from the United Nations SDSN, which I helped to co-author in November. And that report mentions an ARPA land. The members of Congress proposed an ARPA Terra to focus on innovations to help the agricultural sector to innovate, and also to put that in the context of energy and water use. Next, in addition to Nexus thinking, we need to consider temporal issues. So short-term versus long-term, some synergies instead of just trade-offs. So instead of focusing on the extraction or depletion of water to produce agriculture, how can we combine those sectors in innovative ways with energy also that will enable synergies? So for instance, solar irrigation or solar irrigation using combined with hydropower turbines, any kind of technology like that. And you'll have heard of some of those types of technologies yesterday, and you will hear more about some others today. And then in terms of temporal considerations, another idea is this concept of food, energy, water impacts along each point in the food system trajectory. So I've mentioned that already, that we need to consider each point in the food system and what impacts the use of energy and water have, and how those can be leveraged positively to promote a sustainable food system. Finally, demographics and geography. So we've discussed food apartheid and food justice aspects. Those need to be addressed and taken into consideration for each community, so the community voices need to be heard. We need to think about the water and energy roles in food system apartheid and justice. And finally, we need to institutionalize community input to address challenges related to food apartheid and food justice in the context of the food, energy, water nexus. These are just some references in case you are interested in reading about any of the programs and projects that I mentioned, or looking at the data. And finally, thank you so much. These are photos that I took out in the Culpeper area when I was doing research there. And I thought they represented the food, energy, water nexus, and also some of the food justice issues as well. Thank you so much, and I look forward to your questions. Thank you.